Hello to all of you dear friends. I hope you are all well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to channel, Freedom in Humanity. Please subscribe to my channel after watching the video. This video is the 11th part of the subject of prophets of God. This video is about the prophet of God Joseph. Please stay with us until the end of this video. Joseph was one of the prophets of Israel and the son of the prophet Jacob. He ruled Egypt for many years as a prophet. And in a part of the Quran, the name of Yusuf is written, and in it the story of his life is described in detail. Joseph was thrown into a well by his brothers as a child, but a group rescued him from the well and sold him as a slave to the beloved of Egypt. Zuleikha, the beloved Egyptian woman, fell in love with Yusuf's beauty, but after Yusuf refused to have intercourse with her, he accused Yusuf of betraying the beloved of Egypt and he was imprisoned. After many years, Yusuf proved his innocence and was released from prison. The story of Joseph in the Quran differs from what the Torah reports in this regard. For example, according to the Quran, the brothers ask Jacob to send Joseph with them to the desert, but according to the Torah, Jacob himself asks Joseph to accompany his brothers. Omar Yusuf is said to be 120 years old and buried in Palestine. Location: Joseph, the son of Jacob, was one of the prophets of Israel, and his mother's name was Rachel. He had 11 brothers, of whom he was the only mother to Benjamin. Joseph was the youngest of all the brothers except Benjamin. The name of Yusuf is mentioned 27 times in the Quran, and the 12th chapter of the Quran is named after him. The Quran introduces Yusuf as one of God's sincere servants. Prophecy: Joseph is considered one of the great prophets. In a narration of Imam Bakir, citing the Quran, Yusuf is considered a prophet and messenger. According to the parable of Joseph, the dream in which the 11 stars, the moon, and the sun prostrated before Joseph, in addition to announcing Joseph's attainment of wealth and power, also expressed his prophecy of the future. Biography, diary. In the Quran, the story of Joseph's life is told in detail. The Quran calls him the best story and tells it in detail about his adolescence, digging a well, selling him to a beloved Egyptian, the story of Zuleikha and Yusuf, his imprisonment, and meeting his father and brothers and his rule in Egypt. Falling into a well and moving to Egypt. A part of the Quran called Yusuf. The story of Joseph's life is described in detail in the Quran. According to the Quran, Yusuf narrates the dream of Jacob prostrating 11 stars, the sun, and the moon. His father tells him not to describe his dream to your brothers, because they are making a dangerous plan for you. The commentators consider the meaning of 11 stars to be the brothers of Yusuf and the meaning of the moon and the sun to be his parents, who later bowed to him when Yusuf reached a worldly and spiritual status. Jacob's children said that Joseph and his brother were dearer to us than our father. One day they asked Jacob to let Joseph go to the desert to play with them and promised to protect him. They threw Joseph into a well in the wilderness, and when they returned, they told Jacob that the wolf had torn him to pieces. According to the Quran, Jacob did not believe them. He later became blind because of the intensity of the separation and crying over Yusuf. He rescued Joseph's caravans from the well and took them to Egypt as slaves. Aziz Misra bought him and he joined the family. The beauty of Joseph and the story of him and Zulaikha. In the books, Yusuf is described as a very beautiful young man. So Zulaikha, the beloved Egyptian woman, fell in love with him, and constantly called him to sin, but Yusuf refrained from obeying Zulaikha. The story reached the people of the city and a group of women in the city blamed Zulaikha. He convened a meeting, invited the noble women of the city, and handed them knives and fruit. He then invited Yusuf to parliament. When he entered, the women were so impressed by his beauty that they cut off their hands with difficulty. After this incident, because every day women asked Joseph for illicit intercourse, he asked God to imprison him to get rid of them. After a while, he was imprisoned on Zulaikha's orders. Interpretation of the dream of the king and beloved of Egypt. In order to understand the interpretation of the dream, Yusuf interpreted and predicted the dreams of two prisoners, one of whom was killed and the other was released, gaining a position with the king of Egypt. A few years later, the king of Egypt dreamed that 7 lean cows ate 7 fat cows. He also saw in a dream 7 green clusters and 7 dry clusters. And when the king's sleepers could not interpret the dream, at that time the prisoner, which was released and went into the court, remembered Joseph, and said that he was telling them the interpretation of that dream. He went to the prison and asked Yusuf the interpretation of that dream. You have 7 years of abundant water ahead, and then 7 years of drought, Yusuf said. He then suggested that in order to survive the drought, they cultivate more for the first 7 years and store surplus produce with the same clusters to stay healthy. The king summoned Joseph because he liked the interpretation of Joseph's dream and the solution to save Egypt from famine, but he told the king's envoy to ask the king about cutting off the women's hands and imprisoning him. The king investigated the matter and summoned the women of the city to the court. Egyptian women insisted on Yusuf's innocence, and Zulaikha confessed to her actions. After interpreting the dream and proving Yusuf's innocence, the king of Egypt released him from prison and his minister and beloved Egypt. Family meeting. During the famine of Egypt, Canaan also suffered from famine. So Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to get wheat. Joseph recognized his brothers when he saw them, but they did not recognize him. He treated the brothers well and sent his shirt to Jacob to see his blind eyes. After that, Jacob and his sons went to Egypt to visit Joseph. Marriage and children. According to the 4th century Muslim historian Masudi, Yusuf married in Egypt and had 2 sons, Ephraim and Misha. Marriage to Zulaikha. In some narrations, it is said that Yusuf married Zulaikha after reaching the beloved position of Egypt. For example, in a hadith, Yusuf saw a woman who said, "Thank God, who made slaves kings through their obedience and made kings slaves through their sins." He asked her who she was and she said, "I was Zulaikha," and Yusuf married her. and it is even mentioned in some narrations that Zulaikha became young with the prayer of Yusuf and then Yusuf married her. However, some people, by examining the relevant narrations, have damaged the document and the content of these narrations and considered them unacceptable. According to some narrations, both of Yusuf's children were Manshah and Ephraim from Zulaikha. Differences between the story of Joseph in the Quran and the Torah. According to the Torah, contrary to the Quran, Joseph described the dream of the prostration of the stars and the sun and the moon to his brothers, and they envied him and feared that Joseph would rule over them later. Also according to the Torah, when he described the dream to his father Jacob, Jacob attacked him and said, "Do I, your mother and your 11 brothers prostrate before you?" Another difference is that according to the Quran, Yusuf's brothers asked Jacob to send him with them to the desert, but in his Torah, Jacob asked Yusuf to follow his brothers to the desert to see if they and the sheep were safe. Death and burial place. Joseph lived for 120 years. When his death came, God revealed to him that he would leave the light and wisdom in his hands to Levi ibn Jacob. Then Joseph summoned Levi with the family of Jacob, who were 80 men that day, and told them that soon a party would overpower you and torment you severely, until God sent you by one of the sons of Levi named Moses is to help. After Joseph's death, every group wanted to bury his body in their neighborhood. He was buried in a marble box in the Nile in Egypt to avoid a quarrel. Years later, Moses removed his body and buried it in Palestine in the 6th and 7th centuries. Thank you dear friends for watching this video. Please support me by subscribing, liking, activating notifications for future videos, your comments, and introducing this channel to your friends. Be happy in any case. Freedom in humanity.